Good afternoon, everyone. We will be starting in about 4 minutes or so. So happy to be here. Looking forward to sharing with all of you and um, hopefully, as much as possible, anyway, learn um, about what you all are doing in your communities to help uh, directly impacted individuals share their stories and assist in some way, or they're included, whether as leadership, whether as support, whether as first person storytellers, using their shared experience, their lived experience to help advance policy uh, and advocacy in your communities. So, looking forward to starting in about 3 minutes. So, okay. About 2 more minutes, we'll get started. For those of you who have joined in the chat, there is a link for a couple of worksheets that I'll be referencing during this presentation about storytelling for advocacy. If you can't, um, if you can't see the link, let me know and I will periodically resend because I think it will disappear or it won't appear for those who are joining late. So let's see. Can you see it in the chat box now? I just resent them. Okay. Let me try it one more time. There we go. How about now? Good. Okay. Um, I guess we'll go ahead and get started. We have about close to 40 people online. I'm sure there'll be more coming. Um, First of all, thank you for joining me today for this workshop. I'm so honored to be a part of the agenda for the 11th annual International Stigma Conference that would normally be held on the campus of Howard University here in Washington, D.C. But I'm happy that we can at least see and meet and communicate and connect with each other virtually. I am in DC. What I'm going to do is a part of a series that I do at the ACLU-DC here in the District of Columbia. One of a series of webinars, advocacy and engagement webinars that help improve the tools of primarily district residents when engaging city leaders and influencing policy and funding decisions. But obviously, this can be used anywhere, anywhere there's storytelling, anywhere there is advocacy needed, anywhere in the country, in the world, actually. And certainly, even though it's designed, at least from my perspective, it was designed from the philosophy of the consumer, the client, the person with lived experience, the person who lives in the impacted community. Their story is as valuable as anyone else, if not more so. This can also be used by organizational leaders who are looking to advocate for funding or services for their programs in their communities. But it's about just kind of getting away from the numbers and the stats and the sometimes the science, but to get to the real impacted stories that come from your voice. So we will talk about during the session why public advocacy and engagement with elected officials is so important, and the power of your story to influence others. Then we will guide you through writing your own personal story in 7 short steps. Now, pre-COVID, when I'm doing this in person, we'd all be in a room, we'd be in groups, maybe paired up, and that part of the exercise we would actually do in person, kind of writing out the story, trying it out on each other before kind of moving forward. But here we're going to cut that part out, and I'll just kind of give you the elements. So, however, when you finish this training, this workshop, my goal is that you take with you the tools to create a version of your story that you can use to either raise awareness, to inspire others, and above all, to influence policymakers. Before I go forward, I should introduce myself. My name is Larry Bryant. I am the Community Engagement Manager with the ACLU of DC, and I will be your teacher today. A little bit about me. I've been with the ACLU for almost 2 years as Community Engagement Manager now, and before I was hired as an organizer. My job with the ACLU is to help provide opportunities for our members, for our city's residents, to be involved in the advocacy and policy making process, to get involved with different campaigns, to learn more about the work of the ACLU-DC here in the District of Columbia and the ACLU affiliates nationally around the country. We at the ACLU fight to defend and protect civil liberties, civil rights of DC residents, whether they're living here, working here, or visiting here. And we do that through litigation, impact litigation. We do it through community education and organizing. We do it through campaigns and community building. So we do all those things. And there are affiliates in every state around the country. Before then, I've worked in nonprofit most of my adult life. Most recently, I was a support programs coordinator at the National Alliance of Mental Illness in New York City, helping to manage support programs. And I've been doing HIV and AIDS advocacy and policy and organizing work for a couple of decades now. I am that old. And to keep it going back, I've also I am a person living with HIV. I'm going into my 35th year of living with HIV. It was diagnosed in 1986. So I have not only kind of done the work, but I'm kind of living the life as well. So happy to be here with you all. And before I continue, I want to let you all know, even though I can't hear you, I can see you kind of both in the chat room and in the Q&A box. So there will be opportunities to either ask questions and maybe I don't know if we can figure out a way to actually hear you, I would love to hear, um, uh, an opportunity for you to share your story as we move on, or we can talk about ways down the road where we can connect and kind of do this offline. Um, so again, you don't have to feel obligated to share, but if you have something you want to share, please, or a question, a comment, please feel free to do so both either in the chat box or the Q&A box. Okay, so I hope you are as excited about this training as I am. I am always excited when I do this training. Um, I want you to follow along with me. There is um, a link in the chat for the worksheets that I'll be going by. And here we go. So for this storytelling training, we want to understand what makes this kind of advocacy effective. So first, we're going to talk about why your advocacy is needed, particularly of those who represent directly impacted communities. So if we're talking about people living with HIV, people who are trying to advocate for safe and affordable housing, for expanded healthcare, et cetera, your story, your advocacy is needed. And we'll talk about why. Next, you will hear tips on how to bring skill to your passion and advocacy. It's one thing to be passionate, to be emotional. We're telling our stories. We're telling about the scars and how we receive them. But we have to be able to do that in a way where we can express, strategic advocacy and making sure that the story enhances our ask and doesn't detract from it. Then you're going to hear an example of a story through testimony given at one of DC City Council's hearings earlier this summer and I think like last year. And then I want to, we're going to discuss what makes the examples work. Then I will share the 7 steps to creating a story with elected officials and city leaders that can help in changing or creating policy and community awareness on an issue that is both important to you and your community. And so at the end of this, you will have the tools to be able to create your own story in your own voice and let me know. Hopefully this will all sound good to you, because normally I would say, give me a thumbs up or let me hear you. But in this case, I'll take your word for it. Okay, I will add the workshop into the chat box again. Hold on. Okay. All right, so before we move on, let us talk about the difference between personal advocacy and policy advocacy. So when you advocate to influence circumstance or services for yourself or someone you care about, you are engaging in personal advocacy. When you're advocating to improve circumstances for others, you are engaging in policy advocacy. So today's storytelling training is going to focus on the policy advocacy, sharing your story with policymakers to help influence their decision around funding priorities, supporting much needed social programs, raising awareness about these issues with community members or allies, or maybe it's against a particular policy or against a particular decision that your legislative body has made and you want to advocate for something else. And no, I see in the chat box, do you have to be HIV positive? I'm assuming that is to discuss advocacy. No, you don't have to be. This is whether it's for HIV program, prevention program. It could be. I actually originated this workshop working at NAMI. So it was for people living with mental health issues, going to Albany in the capital of New York to talk about what was working, to give real face and voice to policies that either work or don't work. So it could be for so many different reasons. It could be around housing. I think the examples you'll see later aren't necessarily HIV specific or HIV related necessarily. It's around education, it's around housing. So it's so many different avenues, so many different places, so many different issues and topics where this structure can be used. Thank you for your question. So before telling your story to a policymaker, it is helpful to know what makes a story either less effective or more effective. So let's brainstorm what you feel makes a story either less or more effective. So first, I'll ask, and you can answer in the chat box or in the Q&A. Actually, I guess you can do it in the chat box. So any volunteers on what makes a story less effective with legislators? Whether it's you by yourself or you with a group of people going in to talk to a legislator about an issue. When people can't relate to it, you mean people, the legislators that can't relate to it, or yeah, being too aggressive can kind of take away from your words, your ask, your impact. Yes, emotional impact is effective when you use your story to highlight or support a policy change. Is it policy change? Policy advocacy? It could be either. Your audience. It can, going too long can be a problem. Giving wrong information can be a problem as well. Generally, when you have visits with legislators here in DC, when you're providing testimony to a council hearing, you generally, as a public witness, you generally get 2 to 3 minutes. So you have time. You have a time space in which to give your testimony. It's always best, obviously, to write out what it is, and I mean we'll talk about some of those things, what makes it effective. But definitely going too long makes it ineffective. Having too many voices talking at once can make it ineffective. And I think the first comment was, the person or the audience, whether it's a council member or a member of Congress or whoever your decision maker is just not, he or she just doesn't have any connection with the issue. And that's where you can become a great advocate. Now, what makes a story more effective with legislators? I think we've kind of talked about some of that stuff. Being brief, getting to the point, or as Alexis says, approaching with lack of confidence. But if you are confident, if you are exactly sure of what you're saying and prepared, when you're talking or talking too much, when you only have 5 minutes and there's like 3 of you there to share and you're talking too much. Yeah, so you have to coordinate that effectiveness or that strategy together. So it's not too many people talking, because the most important thing is getting that ask out, is understanding where that decision maker is on the issue, and then strategizing on how you make them an ally, or or do you have to be an educator for them? So, I mean, I'm sure you already know a lot about, obviously you already know about what makes a story effective and what makes a story less effective generally. And just keep in mind what you already know as you are tailoring your story. So for those of you who are new to advocacy or sharing your story, and trust me, there's a lot of us either here on this webinar who run or have positions in organizations, but still haven't yet, kind of shared their story or given testimony or have done that. So, but we have the information in our head. So for those of you who are new to advocacy or sharing your story, this training hopefully will build those skills step by step. So hopefully it'll feel very comfortable. And then there are some of you who have a lot of experience, and you'll see this workshop is also designed to enhance your skills and help you be more effective, both sharing your story and helping others do the same. So, so the bottom line is, I mean, as we mentioned in our agenda, we will begin, sorry, I lost my place. We will begin by talking about why your story is important. It's simple, because every resident, whether you're in DC or wherever you live, no matter what neighborhood, how old you are, has your own lived experience. And when city leaders, congressional leaders are crafting policy and new legislation, it is your lived experience that should inform those decisions. And most days in the calendar year, we have the opportunity to meet with legislators. Now, again, in the new COVID world, how we engage with our council members, our congressional members, is a little bit different. Sometimes it's done through Zoom. Sometimes there's limited in-person space. But sometimes it can be. Maybe one day it'll be in their offices, and we can share with them the issues and concerns that we see every day. And when we share our story with other community members, and this is the other part of storytelling, when we share our story with other community members, whether it's in your neighborhood, at your council meetings, at your ANC meetings, if you're familiar with DC jurisdictions, at PTA meetings, at your churches or faith institutions, you can either teach others about problems or issues they weren't even aware of, or you can also build community coalitions with others who share the same passion about any particular topic. And it also gives those individuals a boost of confidence to see someone from their neighborhood, someone who looks and sounds like them, someone who shares those same lived experience, lived history, to be able, if they can see you do that, then that gives them kind of an added confidence and added boost that they can contribute as well. Again, the bottom line is, as residents and voters, we have the right to speak up about the things we think matter. What our neighborhoods think matter. We have the right to speak up on the issues that affect us and the people we care about every single day. Telling your story is a way to speak up. It helps illustrate what's happening and what helps. And by telling your story in a compelling way, you help change the attitudes and influence policymakers' support for your issue or campaign. Okay. So, hold on, I think I skipped ahead. All right. So research has shown that stories evoke emotion and empathy are far more powerful than facts and figures in shaping the opinions of others. Now, that's not to say they are just filled with emotion and empathy, but if you want to really touch and move minds and emotions, it helps to have it than just the facts and figures. And it also means knowing your target, knowing who you're speaking to, knowing what appeals to them, and knowing what they pay attention to. Sometimes it might be the stats and figures, but having a human at the other end of the story, at the origin point of that story, is going to be most effective. So you want to keep these thoughts in mind. As a community member, as a person with that lived experience, your story is always right. No matter, I've been in meetings with congressional members, with council members here in the city, and I've seen peers talk about how, just what they're experiencing, whether it's need for housing, need for healthcare, whatever it is, and someone at the other end of the table needs proof, doesn't believe them necessarily, or kind of belittles or just overlooks their lived experience. Your story is always right. Second, your lived experience has value and meaning. It's not a competition. It's not a merit-based a situation when you're sharing your story. We all have these experiences and we all have these perspectives, and those perspectives have value and meaning. Now, you don't have to have all the answers when you're presenting to the issue or the situation or whatever you're asking for. You don't have to have all the answers. There are things you can do to help kind of when as you're crafting your story, you can provide yourself as a resource, or you can give additional information afterwards, or you can tag team with someone who can give the answers or give you more in depth. But your main goal is getting a clear ask of your listeners and your audience. So if you think about it, it is very empowering to realize, and especially now with what's happening all around us, this entire year of 2020 has been just a nonstop, moments of uprising and voices and stories being heard and people being forced to listen to those stories. It's happening every day around us. And these stories, those words, the images that we see every day, they move us. And however, while our lived experiences are meaningful, how we tell our story can affect the impact we make. So this brings us to the next part of our agenda and tips for telling our story. I'm going to pause for a moment if there are any questions or comments that anyone would like to ask. I'm checking the chat box. I'm checking the Q&A box. Okay. If not, move on. Okay. So the first tip for telling your story is that your audience, in this, whether it's a council member, if you're here in the city, your city leader, it could be a council member, it could be whoever the decision maker is. They don't necessarily need to hear your life story. Save those details for your therapist or a close friend. Your audience does, however, want to be moved and uplifted. Sometimes, and I have probably been guilty of this once or twice, but you ride in with that emotion, even if you have a script in your hand, and you can start going off track and start losing the impact of your message, of your stated message. And honestly, there are some legislators who are skilled at doing this and kind of keeping you a little off balance. So like if you go in to see a member of House of Representatives, representing your district, and they find out you're from the same neighborhood or you have some neighborhood connection, they will like remind you, hey, you're from, Northeast DC. Have you been to, Ben's on H Street? It's not quite like the one on U Street, but it's nice. And they start talking about the bread and the cornbread and the breakfast, and you're like, oh yeah, you find that connection, and all of a sudden you're off track. So they disarm you. So having your script in front of you, staying on point, and trying not to get disarmed by the person you're speaking to. Yes, save the details for your close friend, and sometimes practicing helps. You get all of that nervous energy out, and then you focus on your goal. Now, the second tip is to be concise and to the point. Your audience also wants you to get to the point, I promise you, especially when you're not running over time. Like what can happen if you're testifying at a hearing. You get 2, 3, sometimes 5 minutes, but here in DC, it's usually 2 or 3 minutes. So remember, we live in a world of sound bites and text messages. You will have to keep it on point, especially if you want others to quote you, because you're going to have an audience there. Want them to quote you, want you to tweet you or share you, or you will quickly lose the attention of your audience. If you are delivering your story as testimony, as say a council hearing, for example, you will usually have 2 or 3 minutes. If you are fortunate enough to get an office meeting or an in-person meeting, whether it's through Zoom or in the office, you may have more time. Now, depending on if you are by yourself or with a group, you'll have more time. Again, structure your meeting. So if you are having group members speak, that you have slotted times and everyone knows their role during that meeting. Either way, it's hugely important to be as concise as possible and leave your audience wanting more. I mean, we all go on and on about how we are impacted. We can all go on about how we're impacted by a particular issue. However, again, if you lose your listeners, if you spend too much time and give too many details, you will definitely lose them. I usually equate it to Netflix movie previews. When I'm scrolling through, you see those little 30 seconds, little video clips, previews of a movie, some of the dialogue and action that make you want to see more. That's what you want to achieve with your story. You give the highlights that leave your listeners wanting to learn and know more. Sometimes you see those 30 seconds and you're like, yeah, not really for me. But you want to just give them as much as you can. You can always be reached afterwards. And then our next tip is bring your emotion to move the listeners, but not overwhelm. Stories that evoke emotion are powerful. However, if your story causes you to cry, it will overwhelm others and they may shut down. Now, sometimes, and this is not saying, Larry saying you need to be a robot and you need to stay on script. It helps. It can be difficult as, say, a provider or a trainer or a teacher to tell you to stick to the words and yield the emotion. Sometimes we are talking about some really raw, historically painful things that have impacted us. The death of a child, the illness of myself, just whatever it is, it could be that emotionally triggering. I'm not saying don't cry or don't tear up. Just remember that you want to have a very consistent balance with sharing the words, sharing the facts, sharing your testimony, but be human while you're doing it. If your story causes you to cry, that's being human. If your story elicits emotion, but without causing you to break down or tear up, you will likely move the others and the audience or the listeners. And that is the right amount of emotion to move, but again, not overwhelm. If you find your story brings up tears or trembling in you, focus on the aspects that do not bring up as much pain, or use language that allows you to maintain composure. Also, practice, practice, practice. As you're practicing delivering your story, whether it's in the mirror or to family and friends, you can help yourself through that emotional preparation ahead of time. If you've read your testimony, especially if it's emotional or triggering a few times beforehand, you kind of understand where those moments are coming from. You're a little bit more prepared when you're doing it live in person, in front of lights, cameras, or in front of your council member or whoever your audience is. Okay. I see a question in the chat. How can an advocate get comfortable asking for their ask? Most are afraid to ask for fear of not being able to present or speak at the next event. That's kind of a challenge as well. Kind of layered though. I think we're going to get to that. So hold on a second. Another tip, our next tip here, is when possible, include the positive outcome of what you're advocating for. If it is about increasing funds for after-school programs in your neighborhood, or expanding the outreach services, or expanding funding for outreach services at the health department, give examples of how it has worked in the past and can be even more effective to more youth, to more families, to whoever the target audience is, or the priority population is, if expanded. When possible, use examples that are personal to you and your community. And if applicable, use positive concepts like hope or recovery. A friend who commented earlier in the chat box sounds like a mental health advocate. And in mental health circles, we talk about recovery, we talk about hope, and talk about like what that means to a person who's seeking to make those changes on their own. And when you use those concepts in front of city leaders, in front of decision makers, it not only it's yes, you can assign dollars or programs in your ask, but it's the hope and it's the positive nature of what that program or what that decision can do that will not only uplift or heal you, or provide, meet your needs, but it'll heal you as a community as well. I mean, hope is a powerful motivator for policymakers, and an audience usually likes to root for those who make it through adversity. So when possible, use this as your advantage. And tip number 5, and maybe the most important tip, is to make a clear ask of the listener. If you are talking to a policymaker, let them know what exactly would help others, and then ask them if you can count on them for their support. So this puts them on the hook by asking them for a commitment. The response by a council member here in the city or the decision maker, for example, will tell you a lot. If they can commit, especially publicly, now our council hearings in DC they're recorded, they can be shared, they're live streamed on Facebook and other platforms. They're saying whatever they're saying publicly. Everyone hears you. And with an audience present, you have a supporter. You can hear them because they're answering in publicly. However, if they say no, and they sometimes say no, as we all know, or they are non-committal, you know where they stand and that you need to follow up and nurture that relationship to build support or pressure. Sometimes you could be the conduit for whatever education they need on that issue. Sometimes they aren't aware, or they are unaware of the impact of whatever you're talking about, of your issue. So you could be a valuable asset to them in helping them learn. So don't take anything outside of a yes as necessarily a no. It's just yes and then obviously there are the challenges where you just have the hard no's, but you know where they stand. Now, you don't have to take a negative or non-committal response personally. Your listener may be under intense pressure to take a particular position on your issue, or maybe they are just being cautious. I mean, there are different jurisdictions all around the country. You know your legislators best, you know your decision makers best, and you know the kinds of hurdles you may or may not have to go over to reach them in this fashion. So just be cautious. Take it all in stride, and work to develop your next steps, whatever those steps may be. I feel like I've been talking for a while, and you've heard a lot of information. So I'm curious to know, is there anything that stood out as the most meaningful information or point or tip that you've heard so far? I'm looking at the chat box. I'm looking at the Q&A. I believe so. Yeah, I think check the conference, your Hoover app, I think it is. I think it's recorded and it should be saved. If not, definitely contact me afterwards, and I'm happy to do this presentation again for people. Any tips, Stephen asked, any tips on quickly adjusting to changes and how much time given for testimony? Generally, Stephen, if you're giving testimony, and again, I'm going by what I know here in DC and just different places I've been around the country, giving testimony or having timed visits or spaces to speak, you should know in advance what kind of time you have. Sometimes you might find out the day of, like you might have prepared an exactly 2 minute and 58-second presentation that will fit right under that 3 minute timeline. And then you get there and they say, well, we have more people who signed up and we have to cut you all to 2 minutes, which is disappointing, a little bit frustrating. But in most places, you can also submit your written testimony. So your speaking, your in-person testimony or on-camera testimony might be 2 minutes. So you have to kind of edit as you go through, making sure you keep the best elements, the most cogent elements of your testimony vocal. Don't skip over those. But you can turn in the entire testimony in writing, even if it's 10, 15 minutes long to read, in writing when you submit. So you just kind of play it by ear when you know, and then that again comes back to when you're practicing. You understand the parts of your testimony that absolutely have to be shared. Your introduction, earlier I'll go down that list in a minute. So if you have to cut things out just to get to certain things and to ask, they should let you know. But again, your written testimony can be given in its entirety. And yes, talking about the outcomes and results are very good. People want to know, how do you know this will work? Give examples, whether that people in the room, whether it's decision makers themselves or the community members that make up the audience, that they can understand. There might be programs that have worked at other organizations around the city, other places around the state, or other places around the country where implementations have been successful. And so it's not just kind of coming from thin air. Legislators, for the most part, are very careful about taking chances on things. So the more information you can provide that lessen that taking a chance thing, giving them information. This is why developing and creating that relationship, you become the conduit for the information, and you can make them feel more assured about the decision that you're hoping that they make going forward, about the funding, about the program. Okay, so now what I'm going to do before we go through our 7 steps checklist is I'm going to share 1 or 2, depending on time, stories that I witnessed here in DC. These are individuals presenting at council hearings around various topics. And I want you all to listen to their story and see, what makes their testimony either effective, not effective, or what could they have done differently in order to, be more impactful. So let me pull up my first one here. That's a second. Hold on. Okay, there we go.
Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to present testimony of the District Direct Support Professional Rate Act of 2019. My name is Bethany Winston. I live in an apartment in a nice neighborhood, and my staff helped me in many ways. I get the chance to eat in nice restaurants, go to movies, go to concerts, invite friends to my home, and go to parties. My support staff help me to do these things. They are very important to me. They help me to do things I can't do for myself. They teach me how to do things so I can become more independent. My staff help me to find a job. I enjoy working and making my own money. When I have good staff to support me, my life is better. But sometimes they leave because they don't get enough pay. I think my staff should get paid enough to have a good life. If they get paid enough, I won't lose them. It takes time to get to know new staff and to trust them. I don't, I did to, tr- like I did the staff that left. Good staff don't just help you, they become your friends. Good staff is like the family. Please pass this new law that will help my staff be paid better. If you do, we will make it better for me. I will enjoy living in the community, and my support staff helps me to do that. They do a good job and they deserve good pay. Thank you for letting me testify.
Okay. Can you hear me? Um, can anyone, any thoughts there? What about her language moved you? What was impactful about her story and about how she shared it? But what caught your attention? Yes, definitely a personal story. Well, I think she did include her community. I mean, she's advocating on behalf of raising minimum wage and pay for the people that work with her and for her. So it wasn't necessarily about her, um, but it was about how her advocating can better position her staff to be successful, and how that passes on to her clients. Yeah, I mean, what do you think about her? I mean, there's something you could see the reaction about from the people behind her. So it wasn't just the people on the dais who were listening, who would make the decision on behalf of what she was advocating for, but she was kind of speaking for the success and how it all impacts not just her job but her community. Yes, Tina. She was asking for help and for her and people around her staff. Yes, and yes, and she wrote it down, and it looked like obviously she was practicing. Um, I can tell that she was a little nervous, but having the script in front of you sometimes um, helps when you're delivering. When you get nervous, having the words in front of you. Um, she was not the only person advocating. There was actually three or four people at a time. There was like dozens of people who were testifying that day, Crystal. And I was just focused on her story. So there was like someone that was advocating for something or had testimony right before her, and then there was someone who had testimony right after her. And she had about 2 minutes or so, 3 minutes to speak, and she fit it right under time. Now, again, here in DC, after they go through the panel of speakers, whether it's done in person, this was done like last summer, or now with the COVID related restrictions where everything is done virtually, you get a set of 3 or 4 people who speak at a time. And then after those 3 or 4 go, then one of the council members will, if they have questions or they want to engage you directly, they will do so then. So after this panel spoke, then the council members probably asked them questions and they could elaborate going off script about some of the things that they talked about. So yeah, so let me share. She is sharing us because of wages, needed money. Yeah, so excellent comments and responses. Thank you guys. So I have one more to share. Hold on. Okay. So same thing here. Now this was done earlier this summer, back in June. And as you can see, Councilmember Grasso there is facilitating the testimony. So everything is done virtually. So everything about the preparation is the same. You want to have your script, you still have your 2 or 3 minute time. But you know, you want to keep your story or your testimony concise. You want to keep it to the point, and you want it to speak. And don't forget about your ask and what you are advocating for. So here we go.
Testimony. We'll next hear from Ms. Huddleston, the policy analyst from the DC Fiscal Policy Institute. Thank you.
Chairperson Grosso, Chairperson Mendelson, members and staff of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today. My name is Quavila Huddleston, and I am an education policy analyst at the DC Fiscal Policy Institute. I would like to focus my testimony today on how the DC Council can improve the budget to stabilize the childcare industry. As a member of the Undergree DC Coalition, DCFPI recommends the Council provide at least $10 million in stabilization funds in the supplemental fiscal year 20 budget to help struggling providers cover rent, utilities, insurance, and more. Our childcare system was already financially fragile before the pandemic and will not survive unless policymakers provide dedicated recovery funding. The mayor's proposed supplemental fiscal year 20 budget fails to provide immediate stabilization funding, particularly for childcare providers who receive partial or no subsidies. Many childcare providers were operating with thin margins pre-COVID-19, and due to prolonged closures and the accompanying financial loss, DC's childcare industry requires an increase in public funding to remain intact. Altogether, childcare providers have only received $342,000 from DC's Small Business Microgrant Program. Per provider, that is only about $4,000 on average. These funds only serve 18% of the 470 licensed childcare providers in DC. Childcare providers need more support to keep their doors open. While OSSI continues to pay childcare subsidies, as I mentioned, several childcare centers rely on a mix of subsidies and private tuition payments. Many families are unable to continue making tuition payments during the pandemic shutdown, and as a result, some childcare centers are at risk of closing their doors permanently. This would harm opportunities for our children, these small businesses, and our economy. Without dedicated public funding, DC may lose more than 6,500 early learning seats, which represents 20% of the city's childcare supply. Looking to the mayor's proposed fiscal year 21 budget, childcare providers will need more resources to reopen their doors, to increase staff to accommodate smaller class sizes, increase sanitization efforts, and to meet other pandemic-induced safety and social distancing guidelines. To help meet these increased needs, the DC Council should invest at least $10 million more in childcare subsidies. Without childcare, parents simply cannot get back to work. And while DCFPI applauds the mayor's capital investments to create 540 new childcare seats, those seats will not be available in the immediate term. So in light of the pressures of COVID-19, like I said, we are calling on the council to provide at least 10 million more, which honestly is a conservative estimate, so that they can preserve their financial viability. The council must act to ensure that thousands of workers, especially our low income and single mothers with young children, are not forced to quit their jobs or give up new work opportunities due to limited availability of safe and affordable childcare. And I would like to close my testimony by reading a statement from a parent, just to emphasize the importance of stabilizing our childcare industry. I have kids and all of them have asthma. That's a big issue for me. I have a 13-year-old, 5-year-old, and 5-month-old. My biggest concern for them going back to school and childcare is that I want them to be safe and want to make sure that they don't come home with anything. I just started a job and I'm going to have to go back to work eventually. Thank you for the opportunity to testify, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much.
Wow. Yeah, she was speaking fast. I have a sense that she wanted to fit under time. There might have been a little bit of an adrenaline rush there as well. But she knew, yes, she knew what she was saying. She had a lot of numbers. She had specific dollar amounts, and yes, she's an advocating on behalf of families and children. It's not her personal story, but she did relate, I think at the very end, someone who included, their personal story with them. Absolutely. All the comments I'm saying now are great. Like, yeah, she stated a problem, backed it up with stats. Her speed was fast, but you could follow it. You could kind of go with her. And yeah, and it can be difficult. I think the dynamic of speaking into a camera like this, even now as I'm doing this presentation, I am the kind of speaker, like I'm not much of a lecturer where I go in and talk for 45 minutes straight and wait for the end for questions. I feel far more comfortable when I'm interacting directly, so I can see your eyes, your reactions, and be able to connect that way. I'm that kind of speaker, but sometimes in this, when we're doing it in this format, you have to, where practice can kind of to pace yourself. And in a lot of these online sessions and webinars, we also learn that we have audience with multitude of needs. So we have Spanish speaking audience. We have audience members who may are hearing impaired. So you'll have translators or ASL providers also going through, so you have to kind of pace your speech so that you're making sure that everyone can hear you even through translation. So even though she had a lot of information, a lot of facts, a lot of numbers kind of compacted into this presentation or into this testimony, because she was going so fast, there might have been some people that might have missed some of that. So not intentionally, there's a lot worse problems to have in giving testimony or sharing your story, but that's something to think about when we're talking and we want to reach people, whether it's the decision maker and the audience as well. So yeah, thank you guys for that input. Going back to our presentation here. Hold on. Okay. So now that you have listened to these kind of story and testimony examples, you kind of notice how its impact, and for going forward, you need the copy of the seven steps checklist, which was in the link is in the chat, along with your story practice sheet. Now, these two sheets I usually use in person, sitting around a table and kind of talking through the pieces that you fit in the story practice sheet space. So starting with your introduction, starting with what happened, and once you fill those pieces in, the complete structure of it will then be made, and you'll learn how to time it, how to shorten it, how to make it more detailed, and how to fit the needs of whatever story, whatever testimony you're sharing. So we're going to quickly review the 7 steps to creating an effective story sheet, and we will note also how they apply to the example you just heard. And please note how they apply to the examples you just heard, and when you're thinking about writing your own story. So the first step of an effective story or testimony is to introduce yourself and why are you speaking or writing, right? Your introduction should begin by letting your audience know your name, obviously, where you live, whether it's in the city or your neighborhood, and if it applies, what organization or community group, school you are connected to. If you are a student, say what school. If you are a native of the city that you're speaking or a neighborhood, or if you recently located there, include it in your introduction. All of this, I mean, think about your listener, and this is where, probably for a different session, this is where knowing your audience, knowing your decision makers, doing a little research on that helps. They might have a military background. If you share a military background with them, let them know. If you have kids, they have kids, let them know. If you eat at the same diner on, U Street and 14th in Northwest, near Malcolm X Park, let them know. You want to draw as much connections to both the decision makers and to the audience, but be relevant, obviously. You don't want to get too far in the weeds. Maybe when you're in the in-person meeting, you can, and the setting is far more comfortable. You guys can talk about those things, but let them know by introducing yourself and what's relevant to your ask or what's your story. Next, you share how you and your community are directly affected by this issue, whether if it's you or a family member that's directly impacted, whether it's a client or someone you provide service for. How are you connected to the community or to the people or person that's directly impacted by these issues? And it adds to your credibility with the audience as well. And then lastly, your introduction should let your listener know that you would like to share your story, your purpose for being there, and what you want them to support or oppose, or what you want them to do. So this simple statement gives your listener clarity about your intent, helps them to focus and be responsive. And it kind of frames what you're about to share, right? So the second step of an effective story is to describe what happened before you received the help you need, for example. Again, you want to keep this brief. Think about the main highlights or the most important things your listeners should know about the issue or the situation. When possible, always be vivid and descriptive. This can help by painting a picture that your audience can understand or empathize with. Like the first, sorry. There we go. So yeah, the first video we saw where the woman was advocating for better pay for her workers, her coworkers, she talked about their relationships and how when they aren't able to work anymore, that the clients feel disconnected. Their effectiveness as an organization is built on familiarity of the staff to the clients, and losing staff weakens the relationship with their community. So you want to be able to be descriptive of not just the facts and figures about what you're asking, but how does it impact you? Whether it's a positive or a negative is how you describe it. But be vivid, be descriptive, paint a picture, draw a picture, write a picture that your audience and your decision makers can understand and connect with. Okay, so the third step is to describe what helped in this particular, whatever situation it is, or would have helped. So by focusing on the solution, you can create a sense of hope and outcome that can be uplifted for the audience to both hear and connect to. So if your story does not do the program, funding, etc., bring them back to the solution by describing what would have helped or what We're still connected? I'll keep going. Okay, so I'll keep going and hopefully we'll come back. So the fourth step is to describe how you are different today. Hold on, let me stop for a second or pause. Can you hear me now? Is everyone still there? I can't tell. Oh, okay, good, good. Okay, so the fourth step is to describe how you are different today. This is your opportunity to share what is going on right now in your life or in the life of someone you care about, or how you've been positively influenced by the policy or program for which you are advocating. Or if you are advocating against a harmful program or policy, give an example of the negative impact. This gives us a personal story, or it gives your personal story an emphatic, real life example to the listeners of how this policy or program has either positively or negatively impacted you, your family member, or your community, right? And so the fifth step, of course, is, the fifth and sixth step actually, is you want to be clear as to what is the need or problem and what will help others. So this is where you share with and tell the audience, this is the solution. This is what will help in this situation. So in step 6, you describe what will help or what could help others. What is the policy or program or the solution? This should be what you want a policymaker to support or to oppose if that's the case. These 2 steps take you from your personal story, your lived experience, to a message that relates to other people and makes your story relevant to a policymaker. And in the 7th and last step, this is where you make your ask. This is a critical step that many advocates hesitate or forget to do. And sometimes if you get too caught up on the stuff that precedes this, especially in the time session, it's the part you leave off. You can't add because you've gone over time. So you want to start by, as you're speaking, start by thanking your listener, whether it's council or a committee or a single council member, elected or appointed official, for meeting with you and listening to your story. Then you put them on the hook by asking clearly and directly as you can. If you can count on them to support or oppose your issue. If your listener answers with a clear yes or affirmative reply, of course, thank them for the support. And remember, council hearings here in DC are recorded. Most meetings like this and hearings are recorded. And in most cases aired on TV, local public stations. So it won't be just you that sees and hears that commitment. And like the testimony you saw me share, you can always save that, put it on a clip, share it on your Facebook page, wherever, so you can get that person's words, that decision maker's words out there and their commitment on record. Now, if your listener answers with a clear no or negative response, or with an unclear or non-committal responses, then thank them again for taking the time to meet with you and let them know that you'll be able to be a go-to resource on the topic of the issue. Now, again, you know your decision makers better than anyone. and you know what challenges you may have ahead of time sometimes, and getting them on your side, so to speak. And some are going to be harder and tougher to get to, or to have a relationship or have a working relationship with than others. So keep following up if you can, regardless of response you get. Plan on following up regularly and maybe build a meaningful relationship around the issue, even if that person is on the opposite side of that issue. This can help you eventually shift their opinions. In the case of a supporter, it can help build a legislative champion in the council or the decision-making body you're talking about. Yeah, so yes, Ricardo asks, if they say no, can we ask what influenced their decision? Now, you may not have that ability during like a hearing, this kind of test, where it's a testimonial, a hearing, where there are others and you're on a schedule and there's 30 people after you and 25 people before you, but certainly after, kind of off the record or in an in-person meeting, you can ask, where they're coming from. A lot of elected officials will happily give you reason for that. And sometimes if you understand what their reasoning is, you can better understand whatever strategy you need to implement, to get them on your side. Or maybe they can, they will, especially if their decision is made based on other allies they have or other information, then you can put your information up. You kind of know where to begin when you're trying to build that bridge towards their support. And sometimes, and honestly, especially in today's policy and politics, sometimes there are people who are just always going to be on the other side of the fence. But it doesn't hurt to ask or to approach them. And you never know, sometimes you never know when they might come around to your side on a decision on an issue, even if they've been historically against or opposed to certain things. People do sometimes change. But they can do that with your help in providing the information that you need them to have so that they can see that perspective that you and the people that you have in your community want to be able to share. So basically, that's it. That's it. We talked about the introduction, how to frame both yourself and the issue when first meeting, whether you're meeting in person, where you're giving testimony, or you are having a meeting. Be descriptive of what your issue is. Let them know everything they need to know. Be clear. You're sometimes you are the educator in the room when you're providing testimony, and you're educating on your perspective and your issue. So most times in a way that they aren't aware and they don't know. Talk about what helped. Talk about the tools that helped, or the tools, or if there's something that's bringing harm or program, an issue, some kind of legislation that's provided that's adding harm to your community. Talk about what that is, and then show the change in whatever direction. Things were great until you cut the funding, and now we have an increase of 16, 18, 22% of people coming in because that program is gone. We need to restore that funding. Or the opposite. This outreach program was given more funds, was given more people, more staff. It opened its strategies up to community input, and now it's showing like 110% increase in effectiveness. Talk about that change. What is that change? This is the kind of the real picture of how you want, what you're advocating for, and then share what that solution is. Sometimes if you're doing the work for the legislators, when you can talk about what these things are, you're giving them less work to do. They have no choice but to kind of come to you for additional support. And remember, don't forget your ask. You can be distracted sometimes with your testimony, or probably more so in a hearing. You can be kind of disarmed, if you will, from staying on point by the legislators themselves, who kind of just want to, get you off your horse, so to speak, and not be as on point, and so you kind of get disoriented. Don't forget your ask, and then wait for an answer. A lot of times, I mean, I've seen it happen. I've probably done it once or twice. Is you get to ask because you just want to get it out there, and then you forget to wait for an answer or to follow up on it. So get that ask out there. So with all this, I mean, you have the tools to create a story based on your lived experience to share with any elected or appointed official anywhere, really, in this city or anywhere. A story and experience that can help write or rewrite legislation. You can rely on it as your base for your advocacy. In this case, you have already done the hard work, and it puts your unique fingerprint on it when you add your story. And like any good story, you can use it over and over to restate your point and to build community partnerships with others who have had similar experiences. And with just a few changes in the details and the focus, you can also share your story to different audiences for a range of different issues and outcomes. Like I said, talking to members of your church to get their support on the issue. A lot of times we are the best conduit for information and education in our communities, and being able to have these conversations on the community level, on the neighborhood level, helps to educate and empower the people we know and love, and the people who know and love us. So hopefully, I hope that you all took a positive experience away from this session. And I hope that you all feel better prepared to either tell your story and advocate than you did walking in, or being able to share these skills on to others, to your clients, to your coworkers, to your colleagues, to your peer groups. And I hope that it's helpful and impactful for you. If there are any comments, I'd love to hear kind of what your thoughts, like what was the most important part, most impactful part of this presentation. And since I like to be a little more get better at this, if there are something that I can do that would have been a little bit different or better or more effective, you can put it in here. Here's my contact information, my email address. I share, again, the tips and the template in the chat, but if you go to acludc.org/DC budget, you can see the tips and template for or recorded testimony to the DC Council, which I'm sure is very similar to other council or legislative meetings and hearings around the country. What was the outcome of the two stories? Well, I think one of them is an issue, the raising of pay, I think passed. So what the First Lady was asking for, it was a situation that the pay rate for those workers was increased. Still a lot of challenges. Everything wasn't completely covered for what she was asking, because that included insurance and other things, but it did land in a positive way. And I think we're still in the process for what we can do to better enhance our schools and learning for children. So I think for the second story outcome is probably still in progress, but we are moving to the same direction, especially as we, ACLU-DC and other organizations around the city, are doing more to get voices of those most impacted, whether in schools, young people in schools, students, clients, consumers of organizations, coming and sharing their story and talking about the real outcomes. Yes, it's great to see the executive director of AIDS United or whoever, speaking at some of these places, but it's as impactful, if not more impactful, when the individuals who are directly impacted by those services and programs are also speaking in their own language, sharing their own experiences. So that's all I have here. Thank you so much for allowing me into your living rooms, kitchens, dining rooms, wherever you are viewing this from. If you have any questions or want to contact me, if you want version of this storytelling workshop done for your organization, your peer group, your constituency, please feel free to contact me here. Otherwise, I am on my Hoover app, and I love all the questions and discussion that are happening here. So you can also find me on the app too, and I look forward to talking with you all soon. Everyone, please stay safe, stay healthy, and I look forward to reconnecting with you, I hope sometime soon.